Noam Chomsky, a renowned political activist, linguist, and public intellectual, has spent decades dissecting the intricacies of power, propaganda, and foreign policy. In his book, A New Generation draws the line Kosovo, East Timor, and the standards of the West, Chomsky turns his critical lens towards the West's interventions in Kosovo and East Timor. He challenges readers to move beyond simplistic narratives, urging a deeper examination of the motivations and consequences of these interventions. Chomsky argues that the West often employs a double standard when it comes to intervening in global affairs, while quick to champion humanitarian intervention in certain instances. The West often turns a blind eye to similar or even graver situations when it conflicts with their own geopolitical interests. This selective application of principles, Chomsky posits, exposes the hypocrisy at the heart of many Western foreign policy decisions. Chomsky's work is characterized by meticulous research, sharp analysis, and a willingness to challenge conventional wisdom. He meticulously deconstructs the justifications given for Western intervention, exposing inconsistencies and hidden agendas. He examines the historical context, the power dynamics at play, and the often overlooked voices of those directly affected by these interventions. Through this rigorous analysis, Chomsky invites readers to question the narratives presented by those in power and to develop a more nuanced understanding of international relations. The concept of humanitarian intervention has become a particularly contentious issue in international relations. Proponents argue that it is a moral imperative for powerful nations to intervene in situations where human rights are being violated, even if it means breaching another state's sovereignty. Opponents, on the other hand, view it as a dangerous precedent that can be easily manipulated to serve the interests of the powerful. Chomsky falls firmly in the camp of the skeptic. He argues that the West's track record of intervention is riddled with inconsistencies, often prioritizing strategic interests over genuine humanitarian concerns. He points to numerous historical examples where the West has intervened not to protect civilians, but to further their own economic or geopolitical goals, often with disastrous consequences. Chomsky's work challenges the notion that the West operates from a position of moral superiority. He argues that the same principles used to justify intervention in one instance are conveniently ignored in others, particularly when it suits Western interests. This selective application of international law and moral principles, he contends, undermines the very legitimacy of the international order. A New Generation draws the line focuses specifically on the cases of Kosovo and East Timor, two regions that experienced significant humanitarian crises in the late 20th century. Both cases involved widespread human rights abuses and calls for international intervention. However, the West's response to each situation differed dramatically, revealing in Chomsky's view a blatant double standard. In the case of Kosovo, the West, led by NATO, launched a bombing campaign against Serbian forces in 1999, citing the need to prevent ethnic cleansing of Kosovar Albanians. The intervention was widely praised in Western media as a victory for humanitarianism. Chomsky, however, argues that the intervention was motivated more by a desire to assert NATO's dominance in the region and to weaken Serbia, a traditional Russian ally. East Timor, on the other hand, suffered a brutal Indonesian occupation for over 2 decades. Despite widespread human rights abuses and calls for intervention, the West largely turned a blind eye to the situation. Chomsky attributes this inaction to the West's close ties with the Indonesian government, a key strategic ally during the Cold War. He argues that the West's willingness to overlook Indonesia's atrocities in East Timor while intervening in Kosovo exposes the hypocrisy of their claims of humanitarian concern. The late 20th century saw the Balkans in turmoil, with Yugoslavia's disintegration and rising ethnic nationalism. Kosovo, with its predominantly Albanian population, became a focal point of unrest. Tensions between Albanian Kosovars and the Serbian government, led by Milosevic, escalated in the 1990s. Milosevic's policies marginalized the Kosovar Albanian population. Kosovo's autonomy was revoked, leading to widespread discrimination. This fueled the rise of the Kosovo Liberation Army, seeking independence. Clashes between Serbian forces and the KLA grew increasingly violent. Reports of human rights abuses emerged, inflaming tensions. The international community struggled to find a peaceful resolution. Peace talks faltered and violence continued. The West framed the conflict as Serbian aggression versus Kosovar victimhood. This narrative overlooked the conflict's complexities. Chomsky argues this portrayal justified intervention, shaping public opinion. Section 2. The spectre of ethnic cleansing, examining the narrative. As tensions escalated in Kosovo, reports of atrocities and forced displacement began to surface. The term ethnic cleansing gained traction in the media, conjuring up images of systematic violence and mass expulsions. Western governments accused Serbian forces of ethnic cleansing against Kosovar Albanians, citing mass graves and destroyed villages. This narrative justified NATO's intervention, aiming to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe. Critics like Chomsky questioned the moral imperative, suggesting geopolitical motives. Section 3. Through the Looking Glass. Deconstructing the media's role. The media played a crucial role in shaping public perception of the Kosovo conflict. Western media outlets, often relying on information provided by their governments and NATO sources, presented a narrative that largely aligned with the official line. Serbian forces were committing atrocities against innocent Kosovar Albanians, and NATO intervention was necessary to stop the bloodshed. Chomsky, however, argues that the media's coverage of the conflict was often skewed and incomplete. He contends that the media largely ignored or downplayed Serbian perspectives, as well as evidence of KLA atrocities. The focus remained on Serbian aggression, reinforcing the narrative of a one-sided conflict that demanded Western intervention. Furthermore, Chomsky criticizes the media's reliance on unverifiable information and emotional appeals. He points to instances where reports of atrocities were later found to be exaggerated or fabricated, yet the initial impact of these reports served to sway public opinion in favor of intervention. The media's role, Chomsky argues, was not merely to inform, but to manufacture consent for a military intervention that served Western interests. By presenting a simplified and often misleading narrative of the conflict, the media helped to create an environment in which military action was seen as the only viable option. Section 4. The air campaign begins. A humanitarian intervention or a power play? On March 24, 1999, NATO, led by the United States, launched a massive air campaign against Yugoslavia. The bombing campaign, codenamed Operation Allied Force, was presented as a humanitarian intervention aimed at stopping the violence and protecting Kosovar Albanians. However, the intervention was highly controversial, and its legality, legitimacy, and true motives remain subjects of debate to this day. Western leaders justified the intervention on humanitarian grounds, arguing that it was necessary to prevent a genocide of Kosovar Albanians. They claimed that diplomacy had failed and that military action was the only way to stop Milosevic. The intervention was also framed as a necessary step to uphold international law and defend human rights. Chomsky, however, challenges this narrative. He argues that the intervention was illegal as it was not authorized by the United Nations Security Council. He points out that Russia, a close ally of Serbia and a permanent member of the Security Council, strongly opposed the intervention. Chomsky argues that the NATO bombing campaign was a violation of international law and set a dangerous precedent for future interventions. Section 1. A troubled paradise, East Timor under Indonesian rule. While the world focused on Kosovo, East Timor faced a crisis. For over 2 decades, Indonesia's brutal occupation led to widespread human rights abuses. East Timor declared independence in 1975, but Indonesia invaded 9 days later. The invasion marked a dark chapter, with violence and intimidation. The world condemned but took little action. The East Timorese endured a systematic campaign of violence. Section 2. The Santa Cruz Massacre, a turning point ignored. On November 12, 1991, Indonesian troops opened fire on peaceful demonstrators in Dili, East Timor, killing an estimated 250 people. The massacre, captured on film, sparked international outrage but received a muted response from global leaders. Section 3. The West's cold shoulder, realpolitik trumps human rights. Despite human rights abuses, the West supported Indonesia in the 1990s. The US provided military aid and diplomatic cover to Suharto. Chomsky argues this exposes the West's hypocrisy. Realpolitik, not morality, dictated the West's actions. Section 4. A delayed dawn, independence, marred by contradictions. The tide began to turn in East Timor's favor in 1998, when Suharto, facing widespread protests and economic turmoil, was forced to resign after 32 years in power. His successor, B.J. Habibie, under intense international pressure, announced that Indonesia would allow a referendum on East Timor's future. On August 30th, 1999, the East Timorese people went to the polls in a UN-supervised referendum to choose between autonomy within Indonesia or independence. The result was an overwhelming vote for independence, with nearly 80% of East Timorese choosing to break free from Indonesian rule. The Indonesian military, however, was not prepared to accept the results of the referendum. In the weeks following the vote, pro-Indonesian militias, backed by the Indonesian military, unleashed a wave of violence across East Timor. Thousands of people were killed, homes and businesses were destroyed, and hundreds of thousands of East Timorese were forcibly displaced. The international community, finally shamed into action, intervened with a UN-authorized peacekeeping force led by Australia. The arrival of the peacekeeping force brought an end to the violence, and on May 20th, 2002, East Timor officially became an independent nation. Section 1. The Moral Calculus of Intervention, a Critical Examination. Section 2. The Spectre of Selective Indignation, Unmasking Hidden Agendas. The West's responses to Kosovo and East Timor reveal selective moral outrage driven by strategic interests. Section 3. The Power of Perception Manufacturing Consent for Intervention. Media often shapes public perception, reinforcing dominant narratives and legitimizing interventions. Section 4. Beyond the double standard towards a just and consistent foreign policy. Section 1. Unveiling the Double Standard, A Tale of Two Interventions. Kosovo and East Timor highlight the double standard in Western foreign policy driven by geopolitical interests. Section 2. The Geopolitics of Intervention, Power, Interests and Hypocrisy. Interventions often reflect power dynamics and self-interest rather than humanitarian concerns. Section 3. The limits of moral outrage. When interests collide with principles, moral outrage can drive action, but strategic interests often override humanitarian concerns. Section 4. A call for consistency towards a principled foreign policy. A principled foreign policy prioritizes diplomacy, conflict prevention, and consistent standards. Section 1. The enduring relevance of Chomsky's critique. Chomsky's analysis remains relevant, highlighting the need for critical thinking and accountability in international affairs. The interventions in Kosovo and East Timor, while geographically and historically distinct, raise broader questions about the role of the international community in responding to crises and promoting human rights. Chomsky's analysis challenges us to move beyond the simplistic binary of intervention versus inaction, urging us to consider a wider range of options and to recognize the complexities inherent in any attempt to influence events in a complex and interconnected world. The allure of military intervention, often presented as a swift and decisive solution to humanitarian crises, is undeniable. However, as Chomsky reminds us, military interventions, even when well-intentioned, are fraught with risks and often have unintended consequences. They can exacerbate existing tensions, create power vacuums that are exploited by extremist groups, and prolong conflicts rather than resolve them. Moreover, the focus on military intervention often overshadows other, potentially more effective means of addressing human rights abuses and promoting peace. Diplomacy, dialogue, economic sanctions, and support for civil society organizations working on the ground are often overlooked or underfunded, despite their potential to address the root causes of conflict and to foster sustainable peace. Chomsky's work challenges us to think beyond the paradigm of intervention, to consider the full spectrum of tools available to address global challenges, and to recognize that the most effective solutions are often those that prioritize prevention, dialogue, and cooperation over coercion and military force. Section 3. A call to action. From critique to constructive engagement. Chomsky's work is a call to action, urging us to engage in shaping a just and humane world. His commitment to truth and justice inspires us to challenge injustice and work for a better world. Chomsky's legacy lies in inspiring activists and citizens to question the status quo and promote peace and justice.